All right, welcome from the Mouse That Roars, news and commentary at regularguy.com, YouTube, and around the world on all of our friendly websites out there. Thank you, everyone who spreads the good news of the programs that we do here. Always helpful to have as many folks on board as possible and get these important topics of, and great guests out to folks. And so thank you for that. Joining me today is a gentleman who I was introduced to through one of our producers, Kelly. And we, of course, had a Huffington Post article that really caught our eye. Because for years, Kelly and I have discussed kind of the fraud of what we know in this political dynamic in America as the right-left paradigm. And I have often referred to the various parties as cults. Republicans have a cult following. Democrats have a cult following. And in the end, if people's adherence is to the cult, then the greater cause of the great promise of American freedom is somehow lost in the message. And joining us is a fellow who noticed some of this in an article which appears at Huffington Post. His name is Robin Koerner. I hope I pronounced that right. Hello, Robin. How are you?
Yes, thank you. I'm good. Thanks.
So, Robin, you wrote this article at Huffington Post. Great article, but you make kind of an ominous statement about the Democrat Party and the adherence to President Obama, and this kind of blind following that he seems to have in the Democrat Party. I didn't realize worries people who are not way out on the right with me, and it just was a fabulous article. And just tell me about what you've observed, what your concerns are.
Okay, so I'm just so I'm clear, you're referring to the article entitled "If You Love Peace, Become a Blue Republican."
Absolutely, where you talk about Ron Paul clearly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the reason I ask is I write quite a few articles that try to be, as it were, post-partisan, and so I kind of discuss the issue that you raised here at the beginning from a number of different angles. But the big article that I wrote that I guess got people really interested in my ideas was that one, the Blue Republican article. Yeah, so basically what I was saying, I mean, I'm writing on the Huffington Post, so I'm aware that my audience is center-left and even far-left. So I was kind of writing for that audience, and I was saying, look, there were good reasons to want to punish the Republicans after Bush's second term, and there were good principled reasons, therefore, to vote for Obama, and they were that you liked civil rights, that you didn't like waging war against countries and innocent people that don't threaten us, and that you don't like crony corporatism. And if they were your reasons for voting for Obama, good on you, but if you're going to stay true to your principles, there's now only one move that you can make politically for Republican to make sure that Ron Paul, who's the only candidate with a track record of caring about these issues and these principles, to make sure that he becomes the GOP nominee and then goes on to win the presidency. And that was the superficial argument of that article.
And I think one of the comments that you made that got my attention really resonated with me was, that the Democrats voted for President Obama. They got the hope, but they didn't get the change.
Yeah.
Just expound on that just a little bit for me, will you?
It's almost like the only thing that changed was the hope, right?
Yeah, well, what are we hoping for now, I guess?
I know, I'm hoping for change of president. But, I mean, one of those kind of tongue-in-cheek one-line summaries that I have of the situation is that you have to vote for Ron Paul now to stop Bush from getting a fourth term. Because on these issues that matter, Obama really has been Bush plus, not even Bush light, the crony corporatism and the militarism, and certainly, which is a huge issue, the takedown of the Bill of Rights. I mean, there are very few of those first-term amendments left now. There's a lot to be said about it. But
I was one of those. I was one of those Republican diehard cultists who got behind George W. Bush early on, and George W. Bush said something that attracted me to him, which I thought was a fairly powerful comment made by a Republican, especially a guy who was supposedly kind of dense. And what he talked about was what he termed the soft bigotry of low expectation.
Oh, that was the best line he ever said in his presidency.
And when I heard that, I thought, here's a guy who truly embellishes the the honest, deep, heartfelt sensitivity of what was being called at those particular moments in American history, compassionate conservatism. And I thought, yeah, because we've got to get folks who constantly dwell at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale to realize that they can climb to the top. They don't have to stay in those environments. They don't have to stay in that dire situation of inner city life or whatever the circumstances are that they live under. And they don't have to be compelled to live life of illiteracy and prison and early death. We can help folks by using that kind of compassion, I thought. And so I was immediately attracted to George W. Bush with that. He puts on this Texas yeehaw thing, but deep down he gets it. And in the end, I found out he really didn't get it.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you raised that, because it really was my favorite line I ever heard from George Bush. And I thought it was so powerful, especially, since recently, I have tried to tackle the welfare state that is being constructed here in the U.S. You can tell from my accent I'm British, and I come from a country where the welfare state is unbelievably large compared to what we have in the States. And, I talk a lot about how and why it's failed, and one of the things one of the principles that I'm kind of hammering away at a lot in my writing is that liberals especially have to start to come to terms with the fact that their liberal principles are not best served by traditional statist progressive means. I think on the left, for the last few decades, means and ends have been conflated, right? There's this idea that if you have a good intention and you enforce it by legislation, you get the good intention. But of course, we've seen that's not how politics works.
No.
Political intention doesn't determine outcome.
Right.
And so what we now have is kind of a worst of all worlds. There definitely is a huge place for something akin to what you thought George Bush was talking about there. In our society, we do need empowerment as opposed to handout. With the system that we have, whilst giving people at the bottom a subsistence income, and indeed doing so increasingly, we have actually completely decapitalized the bottom half of American population. The bottom 40% of Americans only own 0.3% of American assets. And that's a direct consequence of, among other things, the monetary system that my favorite candidate, Ron Paul, is trying to explain to us.
Right. And I think Americans, generally speaking, have not a clue how the money system really works. And you're taking people from an infantile understanding and trying to give them a Harvard education with a few sound bites in a political campaign. It can't be done.
Yes, it is hard. I mean, I think as I kind of go around the country sharing the blue Republican idea. Yeah, blue Republican is actually the word I coined for those people who have never been Republicans but are becoming Republicans. Yeah, liberty Republicans to
right.
presidency. I kind of get to talk to a lot of people who've had, to want of a better term, a conversion experience, either from the neocon right or from the left, towards liberty.
Listen, I'm one of those guys that's come from the opposite direction, Robin. I was, hardcore right-wing conservative who over a period of my lifetime, I'm 51 now, I'm still young enough to have some fight left in me, but over the period of the last 20 years in radio in particular, I came to understand through just experience and observation that, the libertarian view really is the quintessential American viewpoint.
I really think that's profoundly correct at some level. And I know libertarian, as a label here, has kind of a kooky feeling.
Oh, yeah, they're the potheads, yes. Oh, yeah, we just want to smoke pot.
Right, so I will default to the term classical liberal. But I think basically the average American is socially liberal, fiscally responsible, conservative, and is live and let live. So this is basically libertarian. This is basically classical liberal. And indeed, in my reading, the Constitution itself, the foundation of this country, is broadly classical libertarian. I think you're right about that, and I think that's why people like you and me, who are, as it were, operating in this liberty political market segment, are in an expanding market segment, and we just need to keep doing what we're doing. Because I think people are waking up to this. And to go back to your earlier point about getting people from the infantile understanding to a Harvard education, yes, and the people I speak to make it clear to me that in each case they heard something that someone like Ron Paul said, or Judge Napolitano or whatever, and they started exploring for themselves. And they got excited, right? And they sit down for hours, whether it's YouTube video interviews or reading old articles, whatever, and they start to see this other paradigm, and it starts to click. And it is a journey that people go on. You've gone from the right towards liberty. Someone came with more liberal sensibility towards liberty, but in each case, you have to educate yourself because. It can't be done in sound.
Well, I can tell you almost the exact moment that my mind began to go through a transmogrification, my thinking anyway, on this topic, and it was really a part of what the Bush administration did with the Patriot Act. And I was on the air at the time as a radio host, and I was trying to express to people my concerns and my feelings, sentiments, ideas, concepts, and my understanding of these subjects, and I'm reading this thing, and it scared the living hell out of me. Yeah. I began to think, oh my God, Big Brother's going to be in the bathroom counting the toilet paper on my roll. You know what I'm saying? I can't. This is craziness. And I actually coined it, and I wrote an article about it, and I titled it, the coming Bush Stoppo. And I never imagined at that time that we transitioned out of Bush into Obama, that Obama would actually be worse. That shocked me. I went, whoa, because
it has been remarkable, and with the NDAA, especially, just when you thought that it couldn't get worse, and now of course there's the executive order whose number I forget, where the president is claiming executive power to delegate the ability to to secretaries of all government departments to abrogate all private contracts in non-emergency conditions.
Yeah, well, these presidential directives or presidential orders are pretty powerful. I mean, we put a bunch of folks of Japanese descent, good American citizens, in internment camps, and rounded up and put a massive amount of scrutiny on a lot of German folks who were German descended Americans during World War II. And, this is a kind of power that the presidency really isn't allowed in the Constitution.
Absolutely. And this is why I think what we're seeing now, that started under Bush and has got worse under Obama, should offend conservatives and liberals in equal measure. And, and I do wonder where the left who voted for Obama, where they are in the face of this takedown of civil liberties. Where are they?
Yeah, well, again, I think it goes back to what I pointed out earlier, and maybe I may be wrong about it, but at least my own personal sentiment is that the parties have become cults. Yeah. The people are, it's like follow Jim Jones to Guyana and drink the Kool-Aid people, and we've really, in my view, got to find a way to break that spell. I know you probably remember the Moonies and all the different kind of New Age cults and things that went across the land back in the 70s and such, and the Hare Krishnas and all these different people. And I remember they had these guys out there called deprogrammers. And the Scientologists hate the deprogrammers, because they're so afraid that they'll get their hands on their folks and start twisting them around and getting them off the Scientology kick. But I mean, right now, I want to deprogram liberal Democrats, conservative Republicans. Where are the deprogrammers? Are you one of those deprogrammers, Robin? Let's put you in a room right now. You're in a room full of Democrats. Deprogram. Tell me what you're going to do.
Well, that's exactly what I do. I mean, if you go to Huffington Post and you type my name in, all of my articles are trying to get Americans out of these mental boxes that they're in. And I should say, this is not an exclusively American problem. I mean, with a two-party system, it's strangely American. Which means, of course, that you can demonize the other lot, the other party, and then kind of win support by default because there's nowhere else to go and there's a great lack of political imagination. Although with the rise of the liberty movement, that's changing. I even wrote an article about exactly this point. My last article was called "Love and Sales: The Thankless Art of Political Persuasion," where I actually talk about the fact that when you're engaged in politics, what you're really dealing with is psychology. You're not really doing politics, you're doing psychology. So the skills that you need to deprogram people really are sales skills. That's what you're doing. When you're trying to bring people around to seeing the light, although you might have truth on your side, you still have to start where they are, not where you are.
But there's the influence of the dominant media culture, Robin. And, using an example of Ron Paul in Wisconsin or Ron Paul at UCLA, where thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people show up. I mean, nothing like that is even remotely evident with any of the other political candidates in this race. And the media completely downplays it and ignores it. And my question is, and I know it's a thorough question, nobody can really answer it, but what would happen if the media played that up?
Well, obviously, things would be very different. I mean, what we're trying to do here, I think, is get to a critical mass. But when you get that critical mass, everything changes suddenly and unpredictably. And huge political change, which we're starting to see the beginning signs of with these huge rallies around Ron Paul, is never linear, right? And something happens, and then something happens. It's like putting the grains of sand on a pile of sand, right? This pile just gets a little bigger, a little bigger, a little bigger, and then at some point, one grain makes the whole thing kind of shift and collapse or whatever.
Right.
And I think that what we're seeing now is a massive social phenomenon. But if the media actually, even if the media discussed that social phenomenon around Ron Paul just as a social and cultural phenomenon, forget the politics. Just the fact that there is this, conservative white septuagenarian, Republican who is at the center of actually arguably the biggest peace movement in the Western world right now, and attracting the under 30s and completely changing politics, among the under 30s. Now that should be a cultural feature story in magazines around the land. If it were, that phase shift, that collapse of the pile of sand would happen quicker. But I think many things are in place for it to happen at some point. And of course, the fact that we are being ignored is actually a predictor of the change. Because if we were not important, if what we were doing was not profound, if what Ron Paul was doing was not profound, then there would be no purpose served in ignoring the information.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it scares the hell out of them. A friend of mine who used to write for Reader's Digest, currently writes for Newsmax, Lowell Ponte, had introduced me to the Nolan chart.
Yes,
and it's a fascinating webpage that people can find. It's just Google Nolan chart, and NOLANCHART. But I mean, the whole concept of centrists, conservatives, liberals, libertarian statists, and all this mix of people, and Ron Paul's drawing from all of those.
Absolutely,
it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen, and I've been following politics very closely since 1980 when I was a young Republican and county chair for Reagan Bush.
I've got to say, I think this is why. I think you're right, and I think this is why the term Blue Republican really took off, because there is a significant minority of people who realize they're not Republican cultists. They realize the problem is with the donkey versus elephant game, but they had no label. Because, a libertarian has kind of, I hate to say this, but as a political party, it seems to have continually failed. And, nothing fails in the US like failure. So there was just this need for another unsullied label. And now we have, for example, on Facebook, we have a Blue Republican Facebook page. There are 11,500 people on that page, just on a Facebook group. And obviously there are a lot more people who identify as, quote, Blue Republican. But the thing about this term is it allows people to be in the Republican Party, but not of it, holding non-mainstream Republican views. And indeed, that idea of blue with Republican being, the red party in the US, is itself kind of subversive of the paradigm, mixing the definitions.
Right. Well,
and I think people like the idea that they can, start find a new political definition for themselves. And I think people are hungry for that. For just
right. Well, I mean, I equate the red and blue with the Bloods and the Crips,
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not a whole lot different, really. The gangsters in Washington, D.C. are probably more brutal and
Yeah.
certainly are taking more money out of my pocket than the Bloods and the Crips ever did.
Yeah.
It's a gang of thugs out there. And Ron Paul has challenged them. I'm actually surprised that Ron Paul is still, putting CO2 gas into the global warming atmosphere.